Hello once again. This this is a story. It's actually a very sad story, and I tell it for a friend who would never tell that story. He never ever spoke about it. Let me begin here. Every day I make a point of walking, trying to maintain a 10,000 step regime. I don't always succeed, but I try my best. And once a week, I make a point of walking past our local market where animals await their fate. Why? I think it's to remind me of the cruelty that goes on around us, but is acceptable to most folk because it's out of sight and it's out of mind. The plaintive cries coming from the market are unmistakably sad because, trust me, they know that something is about to happen to them. And it's probably the fear of not knowing that makes it even worse. It reminds me of an incident that happened in my young life. I was probably no more than 19. I'd run away from home and I was working in London as a trainee telephone engineer. And we were working in a slaughterhouse in Park Royal, belonging to Joe Lyons Group of factories. I'll spare the details, but I distinctly remember the trucks approaching the factory full of pigs. And the pigs were very quiet until they entered their gates and those gates opened. And as soon as those gates were open, they instinctively knew what was going to happen, and they started to squeal. And maybe it was in my head, I don't know. But that squeal sounded to me like a cry for help. And of course, no one ever came. And if you look at history, maybe 20 years before then, no one ever came there either. And my workmate was a guy in his late 50s, and he had fought in World War II as a sergeant. Tough guy. Now, up until that time in my life, I'd never seen a grown man cry, and he cried unashamedly. And of course, crying, very similar to laughter, is contagious. And I remember that like it was yesterday. And we both left that factory refusing ever to go back there again. As most engineers did, not many people went back there. It was pretty horrific. Coming forward many years into the early 80s, I beg your pardon, I was no longer a telephone engineer, but I had a friend who was, and we worked together in London in the same telephone exchange. And we became very lucky, even though we didn't know it then. We both obtained 100% mortgages from the Greater London Council to move out of London, even though I never came from London. We were given a mortgage to move out. And that was just a question of being in the right place at the right time. And we were forever grateful for that. We were homeowners, even though it would take 25 years to pay off the debt. And as young men, most young men, we settled into our lives with wives and children. But John and I, we always spent Friday nights in our local pub together to catch up on gossip and have a few beers, and maybe more than a few beers sometimes. And I know that pubs are not everyone's idea of socialising, but in my humble opinion, the pub is the very heart of society. A good pub has much in common with the church, except that the pub is a lot warmer and the conversation a lot more lively. Here's the hard bit. Late one night, this time of year, summer's gone, winter's not quite here. There was a knock on my door, and it was my friend John. And he blurted out to me that he had lost his son, Gary. And at first I didn't understand, and I reached for my coat to go out and help find him. He said, no, Ken, you don't understand. He's dead. Those words still haunt me all these years later. And at that time, as now, I guess, I didn't know what to do. How can you console someone? I don't know. I didn't know then, and I still don't know now. John, he lived with his wife, 3 children, 2 girls and a boy and a dog. Quite ordinary people, and repeated 100,000 times nationally. That night, fate turned on them. Gary was a typical 14-year-old with his mates and a multitude of things going on in his life. If you remember your tender years as a teenager, those early years seem to last forever, because every day was a new experience of something going on. And you just can't keep up with it all. And his birthday was coming up. And up until that time, his best friend was a dog, a young German Shepherd, who looked to Gary as a true friend and companion. But sometimes as human beings, even as adults, we forget our responsibilities to our friends, whether they be humans or pets. And we let things slide because of something we deem as more important. And it's a human failing, for sure. There was a tree in their garden which held a rope, and on the end of the rope was a tyre. And that was a source of great pleasure for a dog who resembled a wolf, but had long forgotten how to hunt and settled for a simpler life of pretending his prey was in that tyre. Now, for some reason, young Gary had taken down the tyre and the rope. Only he knew why. But his dad kept reminding him to put it back, put it back, put it back, and he never did. One fateful night, Gary was told in no uncertain terms to go out, put the tyre back in the tree with its rope, or else he would not get his birthday presents. Sometime later, my friend was concerned how long Gary was taking and went out to look. I won't divulge the details of what happened, but to suffice it to say, it's every parent's living nightmare. That night, all the family shared the same bed. Mum, the dad and the 2 sisters. I guess in total shock, and they all needed comfort and didn't know what to do. Who would know? The funeral was the most saddest thing I've ever seen in my life. And as close friends, we turned up at the house to pay what? Our respect, our sadness, our relief that it wasn't one of ours. I don't know. these thoughts just go round in your head. Gary Gary was there laid in his coffin, just a lad looking much, much younger than his 14 years. He lay there along with his new trainers and his t-shirt he got for his birthday. The funeral at the crematorium was one that I never ever want to see again. How do you say farewell to a son, brother, friend who was just 14 years old? As the curtain closed on the coffin, my friend John walked up and opened the curtains just to touch the coffin as a final farewell to his son. That will always stay in my mind until I die. The wake was in the local pub, and we stayed there most of the night. I guess in the mistaken belief of giving hope when there was no hope. And my friend John never, ever, ever talked about it, and he took his feelings to his grave. He died a man with feelings he didn't want to share with anybody. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, he blamed himself. Who wouldn't? Another part of the tragedy. Two days before the funeral, I was asked by my friends to come and chop down the tree and take it away. And I did exactly as he asked, and I never asked any questions. 1 week later, Gary's friend, the German Shepherd dog, was found dead at the front door. Curled up at the front door, as if he was waiting for his friend to come home. And he never did. That incident had a great effect on me. We as humans, we're able to communicate, and we can tell each other. We can explain things, and we can grieve, and we can cry, and we understand. Animals can't do that. They don't know. What went through that dog's mind is only a guess, and I'll leave that thought with you. Yeah, it's a very sad story about mum and dad, sisters, a dog. And I've always had a great affinity with animals, simply because animals are not capable of the kind of cruelty that we humans inflict on one another. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.